Verse. All right. All right, here we go. We're going to take these 2 points, and they're going to create a line. And from that line, we're going to create what's called an isosceles triangle. Okay? So, if I take the points 1, 2, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Now I would have that line. Does that make sense? So 2 and 4, and 3 and negative 6. That would get me that line. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What I want to do is create an isosceles triangle. What is an isosceles triangle? What is an isosceles triangle?
Isn't it all the same length?
Mm-hmm. Not all. Two sides. Iso means 2.
Oh, iso means 2.
2 sides. So 2 sides are equal. So an isosceles triangle, well, 2 sides be the same. Well, what do we know about perpendicular bisectors? Right? It will make 2 sides the same. And then if it perpendicularly bisects, right, then any point on that perpendicular bisector will create 2 equal measures.
2 equal what?
Measures. So if I have this, and I have a perpendicular bisector, right? Then any point from here would be congruent to each other. So all of these would be isosceles triangles, right? Now to make an equilateral, it would have to be a specific point that's this distance away from this midpoint, right? That's something maybe I should throw on your final, I think. But I didn't do it till last year. I haven't done that to anyone yet. But that's a great pre-calc question. Is create an equilateral triangle. This one's a lot easier than an equilateral triangle. Because I don't have to know the distance that this is. I can go to a real easy point. So think about this. How do you cut something in half? How do you cut a segment in half? What's that called? The middle point, right?
Huh?
When you cut a segment in half. When I cut this segment in half, what is that point called?
Half.
The half point?
Yeah.
Okay. And some people like to call it the midpoint.
Oh, midpoint.
Midpoint.
Okay.
Right? So, if we got the midpoint, right, which is what we're looking for, and we did a perpendicular to it, right? And we cross somewhere right here on, say, the y-intercept, right? Then, wouldn't that create 2 sides that were the same? Which would inevitably create our isosceles triangle, right? So, we're doing a couple of things. We got to create a midpoint. Then we got to create a perpendicular bisector of that midpoint. Right?
Wait, where did you get that from?
The
midpoint.
The midpoint.
Okay.
Right? then a perpendicular bisector, okay, of the midpoint. Then we got to find the y-intercept of that line. The y-intercept, that's not that hard, right? So then we got to find the y-intercept. The y-intercept. And once I know the y-intercept, I know the point that's going to create what's called an isosceles triangle, right? Where this side and this side are the same. Does that make sense?
Make money.
Where we're going. Okay. First of all, we have this line. Follow me on this. Okay? We have this line.
Okay.
Okay? We find the middle point. The midpoint of the line. Okay? Once we find the midpoint, just like on this one, right? Once we find the midpoint right here, then we find the perpendicular bisector. Well, the midpoint is a bisector, right? So all we need to do is find a line that's perpendicular. And it becomes a perpendicular bisector. As long as it goes through that point, right? The midpoint. So as long as you find the perpendicular line to the point, the midpoint of the original line, then you found your perpendicular bisector, right? Now, when you find that line, and we put it in y equals mx plus b, right? That gives us what? No, think y equals mx plus b.
A perpendicular.
It gives us
What?
the y-intercept,
Oh, yeah.
right? As soon as we find that perpendicular line to this line, find a line that's perpendicular to this line. Remember those questions?
Math is so extra.
Find a line that's perpendicular to this line. Okay? Okay, I found a line perpendicular to this line that goes through this midpoint, making it a perpendicular bisector. Okay? And once I find that line, I throw it in y equals mx plus b, and that's my y-intercept. It gives me the y-intercept. Once I have my y-intercept, I have the point that's off of the line that would create the triangle that we want. Right?
Yep.
All right. So that's our steps. Find the midpoint. Find the perpendicular line that goes through the midpoint. Okay? So find the midpoint. Find the perpendicular line that goes through such midpoint.
Oh my goodness.
Right? And once you have that line, find that line's y-intercept. Find the y-intercept. It's really not that hard. It's a lot of steps, but it's not that bad. Okay? So let's do it. Yeah.
What does that say before midpoint? Does that say
Who's
such
this one?
or such?
Find
No, under
such.
Oh, okay, thanks. Sorry.
That goes through. You could say that midpoint is fine. That midpoint or such midpoint, it doesn't matter. I was being sophisticated. We don't have to be sophisticated, but I do have to get going because this is going to stop recording in about 6 minutes. Oh.
It's not over?
We haven't even started. All right, ready? I swear to God. All right. You ready to start?
Math is so extra, I can't stand it.
All right. So, we have to find the line to this equation. How do I do that?
Whoa,
I don't
we
have
even
space.
started yet?
No, seriously, we haven't started yet.
Hey, bro.
Okay?
Did you
Look how big I wrote. Look how big I wrote.
Starting to write.
Should I pause it here and then start
Yeah.
phase 2?
Yeah.
This is the explanation part, and then we'll start the actual work.
I was the one who did this restart this project.
After that, you better erase that.